All right. Well, we're going to have a good time together tonight. This is minimally rehearsed. It's rehearsed to the extent that we've talked about the questions we want to ask tonight. As we were thinking about what we're going to do this evening, we realized that all day today you've been hearing stories of what God's doing in and through some of the amazing people we get to work with. And so really what we're doing tonight is we want to let you see the story behind the stories, because what you heard this morning doesn't just happen. It's not just automatic. There's some things that go into that. Often at these gatherings we do a lot more teaching and then have some testimonies from missionaries, and we just decided this time we really needed to hear a lot more from them, so that's what we've done. But this evening I want to introduce you to some of the guys I get to work with. And as close as we're going to get to silos is the introduction, because I'm going to ask each one of you just to tell who you are, your name. If your spouse is here, introduce your spouse, and tell what your job is, your title at the Mission Society, and what you do. And that's as close as we're going to get to silos for the weekend, and then we'll dive in.
Okay, I am Jim Ramsay. My wife Shawn is here, and I serve as the Senior Director of Field Ministry for the Mission Society.
I'm Frank Decker. You met my wife Vicki this morning. Go ahead and stand up again. And Vice President for Mission Operations.
And I'm Michael Mozley. I'm the Senior Director of International Mobilization as well as the African Regional Coordinator. And I regret that my beautiful wife is not here, but if she was here, you'd be wooed by her.
And I'm Stan Self, and I am the Senior Director for Church Ministry. And my wife is here as well. Deborah is off to the left over here.
I'm Darrell Whiteman. I'm Vice President for Mission Personnel and Preparation and Resident Missiologist. It's a long title. And in that area comes training, pastoral care, and the whole area of mission mobilization or recruiting. And my wife is not here tonight.
All right. Thank you. Looking forward to this time of just chatting with you. We've referenced a lot the theme for the weekend, reaching the least reached, stories of transformation. This evening I want us to kind of focus in on that theme a little bit more, and hopefully we'll be able to unpack a bit how the Mission Society goes about doing that. We've seen evidence of it today, but how does that all happen, and what's the story behind the story? So for about the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about 4, 5, 6 questions that'll work around that, and then we're going to give you about 10 or 15 minutes at the end to ask questions of your own. So we don't have any plants out there. You might be, as these guys are sharing, thinking about things that you would like to ask, and you'll have an opportunity to do that at the end. Well, before we do anything else, we probably need to begin by defining what we even mean by least reached peoples. We've talked about that a lot this weekend. We hear a lot about least reached people or about unreached people groups. What on earth are least reached peoples, and how big an issue is that anyhow in the world today?
Let me take a stab at it. There are at least 2 billion people in the world who don't have a clue who Jesus is. So for starters, that's certainly least or unreached people. There's lots of ways to define it, but probably one way to look at it was to say people who don't have scriptures in their own language. Now, it doesn't mean just written scriptures, because oftentimes people can't read, so it also has to be sort of an oral form. There's no fellowship of believers in their community. Sometimes we call that a church. And the third characteristic would be there's no believer in their life. So structurally, culturally, there's just no way for them to connect with who Jesus is or to understand what it would mean to follow Jesus. And so those are least reached people. Now, sometimes we think, well, that's only in the Muslim world or in the Buddhist world, but we'll discover there are least reached people all around us, as we heard beautifully this morning from Lexington, Kentucky, from the Hineses.
And if we want to illustrate a little bit, this morning I showed a slide that indicated levels of response to the gospel. Now I'd like to bring up a slide that shows access to the gospel. And this is, the red areas indicate the greatest concentrations of people that Darrell was just speaking about, people who have not been reached. And you'll notice that big red blob in Central Asia are the 3 countries of Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. But you can also see quite a bit of other high concentrations. But I hasten to say also, I mean, we're looking at the whole world on one little screen. And if we were looking at high resolution in a more defined way. As Darrell just said, and as we've referred to as well, there would be pockets of red all over the place where the people who are addressing you today and tomorrow live as well. But this is just a very quick look at the highest concentrations of those who are least reached around the world.
As I was thinking about that and looking at that map, I was thinking about least reached people even among us, as Darrell was talking about. I live just east of Stone Mountain near the Atlanta area. I can drive 11 miles from my doorstep, and I can be in the middle of Clarkston, Georgia. Time magazine said it's the most diverse square mile in the United States. It's a refugee center. People are coming in from all over the world to be processed there. Many of them live there, but then after some of them are processed, they move on out, maybe even into your neighborhood somewhere. And they come basically, many of them, with no knowledge of Jesus Christ whatsoever. I can go north 8 miles, and I can show you the largest Hindu temple in the United States, all within just a very short area. Well, that largest Hindu temple is serving an awful lot of people that we typically think of as unreached. And I will tell you, they are unreached or least reached people if somebody is not going and taking the gospel to them. Mm-hmm. So they would be least reached as well.
Dick, I'd add very quickly, we have a missionary family serving in Clarkston, and as a reflection of the people we work with who aren't at this gathering, 2 of the young ladies on our staff have recently moved into Clarkston and are living there as well. So it's just really cool to see that happening.
Okay. Any other comments on that?
Well, I think, Dick, I also just recently returned from Sacramento, California, and I love Northern California and have lots of friends and pastors that are there. And one of the things that I've seen is that as people come into the church, many of them, I love being in their church when people come in for the first time and they're like, wow, I've never been into a church before. And so there's a huge, I think, and especially we did an outreach in downtown Stockton in a drug-infested area, a highly multicultural area, and most of those people, we see most of the churches have fled to the suburban areas, and no one's rushing into the inner city where I think there's a great number of least reached people that we could reach.
Okay. One of the things that, in the past we've talked more about unreached people groups, and particularly if you get in a school of missions or something, there are some absolute definitions of what an unreached people group is. But when, we've basically chosen to use the language of least reached people groups because that's something that all of us can relate to, because that's a relative term. So in your own community, as you think about outreach right where your church is planted and the surrounding area, where are areas that are more reached and where are areas that are least reached? So it doesn't even really have to be highly technical. I mean, we can look at a map like we saw a moment ago and see on a global scale where are those areas where there's really been little or no access to the gospel. But at a more practical level, at a more fundamental level, right where you and I live, we also need to be thinking strategically about those areas in our community, those people, those population segments in our community that may have more access to the good news, and those, like the people the Hineses work with, they walk past churches every day of their life, but there's no connection between them and those churches, and there's very little likelihood that they're going to end up inside one of those sanctuaries at 11 o'clock Sunday morning, and those are the least reached people in their community. Okay? In light of our new mission statement, some folks might be wondering if the Mission Society's focus on least reached people is a new thing for us. Is it a new emphasis? And if it's not, how did focusing on least reached people become a strategic priority for the Mission Society?
I'll jump on that one. I think I'd say it's a new focus in terms of articulating it and kind of crystallizing who we are, but it flows out of who we have been and from the very beginning. I think I mentioned, or when we were introduced, that we served in Kazakhstan. We went there in 1996. The field was open in 1993. Well, the Kazakhs are technically, even by the technical definition, a least reached people. We've had Grant Miller, whose parents are here or have been here this weekend, that he served in Tanzania among a...
Wave your hands back there.
People. There you are.
All right.
And so... So we've had engagement in least reached areas, and that's been part of our ethos, but it's not been articulated in this way. And we began, it kind of started the articulation of this began about 4 years ago when Dick and I were just sitting down having a chat, and Dick was suggesting, as I was fairly new in my position, that we get a better handle on what we do as an organization. We have a lot of ministries going on around the world, but we need to get a better handle on how we do things, and then so we can articulate that. So that led to a process. I won't go into the whole long story, but we ended up inviting about 20 of a variety of our missionaries from around the world, a couple of board members, and in fact, John Carlos Lopes was one of the folks who joined us for that. We met in Prague in the Czech Republic and had a week with a facilitator, a guy named Bill O'Brien, who just led us through a process of looking ahead and saying, 25 years from now, what will the world look like, and what should our place in the world be? And then kind of backcasting from there to say, how do we get there? And it was a wonderful way to go through and discover with one another where God is leading us. And that led us to this process. It really culminated as that became input to the board of directors, and that became input to us on staff, led us to this kind of discovery that, if the task is going to get done, we're going to have to begin focusing on the least reach more intentionally, not just here and there and hoping it happens because we have good DNA, but we've got to be a little more intentional. And now it's codified in our vision and mission statement, and it's becoming part of the culture and the language of all of our cross-cultural workers, be they in Lexington, Kentucky, in Karaganda, Kazakhstan, or in some place in China. I think it's making more of a difference in the intentionality of how we go about it.
So I'm hearing you say it's not really a new thing for us, but it's articulated in a much clearer way, and so is more of a priority. Are you seeing that play out in any ways among our people? What difference is that making for you in the area in which you work?
I want to respond if I can, Dick. When I came to work at the Mission Society in 1996 as a director of personnel, and you also were in that role, many of the people that came to the Mission Society, we were like trying to find a place that we could put them in, or find a place that they sensed God was calling them to, and just simply facilitate a mission relationship with them. And what I've seen transform in my 13 years since that time, coming back, is that there's an intentionality for us as an organization. Okay. And the thing that I think I love, and that hopefully we can convey to you, is that we want to be listening to the heart of God. And we want to know what God's heartbeat is for the people that are needing people to come alongside them, and not bring that. We have the resident missiologists that make sure we don't bring that colonial model to come and fix or save, but to come alongside and to create models that are healthy and holistic and natural, and that we want to be about putting our hand on God's pulse and feel His. And I think that's one of the things that as we sense His heart for the least reach, we want to be a part of that.
That's good. What I hear you saying is that while we celebrate having more people, the objective is not so much more people, but be more focused as a ministry. Well, that raises a big question for me. It's a big world, and you can just about put a world map up there, close your eyes, and throw a dart, and you're going to find an area of need. And one of you already mentioned that there are somewhere upwards of 2 billion, that's billion with a B. Was it the late Senator Everett Dirksen talking about the growth of the national debt, said $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon you're talking real money. Well, 2 billion people, that's a lot of unreached or least reached people. So that means there are a lot of places the Mission Society could go, and hundreds, even thousands of people groups among whom we could work. So how do you go about identifying where we will go and with whom we will work? How does that work?
Well, I'll just say, I'll name 3 categories and you can fill in some color commentary. You could probably say...
nice shirt, Jim.
Yeah, a little different. We didn't plan this.
Here, Mike, would you move to the end and Darrell come sit in the middle? We should have had one of the ladies come up here and arrange us or something.
Yeah, no, our wives didn't trust us. Anyway.
That wasn't in our script, Frank.
Basically, our fields have started under one of 3 categories. One you might call a Macedonian call, where somebody had a heart for, they lived on the ground there, whether they were a national church leader or some other role in which they saw the need for ministry to take place and they asked for help. And they turned to the Mission Society and said, would you come and help us? Another would be just flat out statistical need. Jim and I went to Arizona middle of last year and just gleaned a lot of research from one other organization that has been involved in ministry focused exclusively on the Muslim world. And we came away with that with some very valuable information, and it backed up a lot of the other things we were learning, and some of the places we're looking at now are a direct result of that type of research. That's not the only research we've done, and everybody up here has been doing research of various types to try to look at the statistical need, just a flat out, what are the numbers and where are the least reached people. And then the third area is what we would just call providential circumstances. Like one of our board members in, I guess, the late 1980s traveled to a part of the former Soviet Union and realized there were no Christian workers in this particular city. And he said, why aren't we there? And we started a ministry there. In fact, 2 places in the former Soviet Union, ministries were started by the Mission Society, and we just call that providential circumstances. So Macedonian call, statistical need, and providential circumstances are the 3 main categories as to how we discover a new area. And of course, all of that's rooted in an attitude and practice of prayer, just asking the Holy Spirit to confirm that this is indeed, because our resources are limited, and our most valuable resources are people, and we want to be wise in the expenditure of those resources.
Mm-hmm.
What we find then, for example, we just finished a candidate assessment week last week. We had approved 13 people to serve with us as missionaries, and we've really seen all 3 of those categories among the group there. We have 2 young women who are part of a church because we have such a high value of the local church that the church in Charlotte, North Carolina has come to us and said, would you help us? We have a mission in Kenya, but we'd like to have your expertise to help us as we do what God's called us to do. So we're not trying to redirect them somewhere else. We're going to work with this church and these 2 young women that are part of that church to engage in the ministry they'll be doing in Kenya. So that's something that was pretty much, it came to us with the place already in mind. We can affirm that it's a strategic ministry. We'll work with the local church to help them realize what God is calling them to do. We had some other families who have had connections already in places that they plan to serve in. One is in Zambia, some in Costa Rica, some in the Ukraine. And so these are people who have been referred to us who already have a connection. Again, if we can affirm that connection and that partnership, say this is strategic, and then give them our training, our DNA, and have them thinking least reached and thinking incarnation, then they'll work in that. But we also had 2 of the couples came wide open. And they said, we have no idea where God's sending us. And we love that kind. It's hard because it can be a year or even a 2-year process to discern where it is that God's calling those people. But those people came to us wide open, and we'll begin the process of discernment. Now, I want to give a story about a couple that, because even if somebody comes to us and says we know where we're called to go, we're still going to push them a bit. And even on the application it says, where do you think God is calling you, and would you consider another part of the world? Because we know that often people have an experience where they've gone often on a short-term trip, and God has broken their heart for people, and they're just sure that God is calling them there. And we had a couple come to us who I'll call the Smiths. It's a good generic name. And the Smiths were pretty sure God was calling them to Costa Rica. They had a very valid ministry plan that we could affirm to work in Costa Rica, but we said, let's just hold off on determining for sure that's where we're going to go. Let's make sure we are good compatibility, and began a process with this couple. Well, after taking perspectives, after having our training, they began to get more of a heart for more least reached areas than Costa Rica generally is. And it began a process that wandered all over the world literally for a year as we looked at the Middle East, we looked at Indonesia, we looked at all kinds of possibilities. And then actually a year ago this month, Sean and I were in a large country in Asia. I'll go ahead and say China. I think I can say China. Large country in Asia. Like, what is that?
Largest country in Asia.
We were in China, but I won't say exactly where. We were in China, and with our folks there, the same place that Frank and Dick and the Johnsons were in earlier, And sitting there talking about our strategy there, about how can we help the Chinese house church be more effective in their own reaching out, especially in Muslim areas across Southern Asia, because there's been a high attrition rate of Chinese who have gone to be missionaries and have come back having burned out because they didn't have a lot of cross-cultural training. And as we were sitting there talking and just praying and thinking about that as a group, this couple's name came to my head. And I shot them an email from China and said, what do y'all think about coming and being a part of the team here in China? And within 2 weeks, it was a done deal. They were in communication with our workers in China. They began the process of final discernment. And lo and behold, about 2 months ago, they deployed and are now living and learning language in China with the hope of working in a Muslim area of China, Western China, to help equip Chinese Christians to be more effective in their witness to Muslims. So all that to say, Dick, it is a process. There's no one way. Every time somebody comes to us, we have to look at the person, at the context, and just count on the Holy Spirit to help us figure out where on earth we should send them.
Do you wish at times you had a formula?
Oh man, wouldn't it be nice just to have a little checklist? Although I have to say, having said that, it is so amazing. We have like the story of the Smiths when that happens, and then to see them thriving and hearing how they're doing, that's a lot more thrilling than if we'd had a checklist.
Mm-hmm. Michael, you talked a moment ago about a ministry really driven by seeking the heart of God. That happens in prayer. And in a very real sense, I mean, obviously I asked the question tongue-in-cheek, wouldn't it be nice to have a formula? The reality is prayer is the formula, isn't it? And there are some other pieces that go into it, but that at the end of the day, it's a process of discernment and really needing to hear from God. And sometimes that's not real complicated. Sometimes it's brick wall after brick wall, and God asked in the middle of the night, say, come to Macedonia.
I remember actually the same couple of Smiths one time. She wrote on my Facebook wall. We do a lot with Facebook now, by the way, with missionaries. And she said, Jim, just tell us where to go. They were so frustrated not knowing and wanted me. And I felt terrible. So like, it's my job. I should be able to tell you where to go. But we just have learned we have to be patient and let the process go and let the Lord be the director, not our need for finality.
Okay. You know, if this meeting was being held in 1911 and not 2011, the answer to the question about how you go about reaching the least reached people of the world would be quite different than it is today. How has the role of the Western Church, particularly the Church in North America and Western Europe, changed vis-a-vis world mission in not just the last 100 years, but maybe even in the last generation?
100 years ago, the sun never set on the British Empire, and colonialism was in its heyday. And so missionaries would take Christianity, commerce, cottonseed, and civilization. So it was all mixed together. And people were won to Christ at that time, but oftentimes it was a much more Western form. Now, 100 years ago, 85% of the world's Christians lived in North America and Europe, 15% in the rest of the world. Now, 100 years later, the center of gravity has completely shifted. So now only 35% of the world's population of Christians are now found in North America and Europe. And 65% are found in what we call the South and the East. Where Christianity is growing fastest is in Africa and in Latin America and in parts of Asia. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, what it means for us is that we still have a role to play, but it's not the role of sitting in the driver's seat. It's the role of sitting in the back seat, of being the spare tire, of being the person that comes alongside. And so if we want to have a big ego about what we're doing, then go back 100 years. You're in the wrong century. I'm sorry. So everything is changing in terms of how do we come alongside and empower others. And sure enough, they're struggling with the same things that we are. That how do they separate the gospel from their own cultural understanding of it? And so they're having the same challenges that we are having. But this is, frankly, the most exciting era of Christian history to be alive, because we're no longer in the driver's seat, and I like that.
Okay. Any statistics on just the numbers of missionaries coming from different areas?
Well, probably in the United States about 45,000 evangelical Christian missionaries. Our number actually has been declining over the years. In the 1970s, there might have been up to 200 South Korean missionaries, and somehow the Spirit of God moved on South Korea and helped them understand this was their hour for mission. Mm-hmm. And today there's over 21,000 missionaries coming from Korea
Yeah.
to the rest of the world. Now, they've got challenges.
Sure.
Because sometimes they think to be Christian in the Korean way is the only way to be Christian. And they look like we did 100 years ago. So certainly the whole thing is shifting, and we now have a role to play to help train and come alongside these missionaries from other parts of the world.
You know, talking about that, the role of coming alongside them, I'm wondering if at times it's more than just coming alongside, it's even being a catalyst for mission movements emerging in what not long ago were regions that just received missionaries. And I know that's a part of what we're doing. This may not be in order, but it seems like a good place to invite just a comment about the role that we play as an agency in helping even mission movements grow up in other parts of the world.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think what Dick had talked to with Bill when they first started this whole church ministries with Stan, they began to do it in the local church in the U.S. and saw the great need there, that most churches were staring at their belly button saying, what do we do for our own church? And then God began to change them. And then there was a brilliant idea to say, why don't we take that internationally? And so I think Kenya was the first place, and then Ghana. And so what we've begun to do now is to create a department that I'm a part of, the International Mobilization Department, where we go into developing countries and train pastors and lay leaders to be missionally focused. And no longer are they having the mentality of when is the West going to come and rescue us or send more missionaries. They're believing Matthew 28:18 and 19 and Acts 1:8 in their own right and saying God's calling us to be globally focused in everything that we do. And we're seeing God radically transform pastors and lay people all over the world. We were, Pastor George, Sister Jan Gilbert, and John Hall, all here, just came back from India where we trained 110 pastors. And to see them, as you see these flags all around this room, we would bring just a portion of them, about 20 flags, and we would do a talk on grounding our church in prayer. And these Indian pastors, who virtually had no idea of any other place in the world, began to weep over these flags and the people that they represented as God radically changed their hearts from being focused on themselves to now saying God wants us involved in missions.
Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow we'll be hearing from Simon Morrow, but I want to at least get Simon to wave his hand here. And
Right in front.
I'm not going to steal his thunder, but Simon is as an example of a movement that is in Kenya that is to reach the unreached people group of northern Kenya. It's a vision that Simon and his team has had, and we just have the privilege of coming along Simon and being a part of helping him reach out the vision that God has given him. So you'll hear more about that tomorrow. I'll just give you a little teaser for that.
So when we say it's not about us, that's not just true for us as an organization, really for us as the church in the West. And coming back to where you began, Darrell, we need to understand a different role and rejoice in being able to be the servants of the global church, recognizing that the job is never going to be finished until the whole church is engaged in taking the whole gospel to the whole world. Well, leaving one's home culture and effectively communicating the good news of Jesus in very different contexts, sometimes to people who may be openly hostile to what at least they think Christianity is, can't be a real simple undertaking. How do you go about preparing people to do that? I mean, someone's called by God and filled with the Spirit. Is anything more than that needed? How is someone equipped to do the work?
There's two things we've got to bring together. One is an understanding of the Word and an understanding of the world. And those two things have to be held together in balance. If we don't understand our message, we don't understand the Word, then we don't have anything to communicate. But if we don't understand that world in which we're communicating that, then we're going to be in trouble. Now, our training program really tries to take a look at how can we help people go as learners. The model we use around here is incarnational identification. In the same way that God became Jesus the Jew and identified with us as human beings, when we take the gospel from one culture to another, we need to empty ourselves of the power and the prestige of being wealthy, well-educated North Americans empty ourselves and enter into the life of those others, to learn their language, to understand their culture, to build a relationship, because only as a relationship is developed can the Spirit of Jesus flow through us to them and from them back to us. Now, I could give you all kinds of curriculum and everything, but the best example of our training program is what you saw this morning in the Hineses and in the drums. They actually were putting into practice what we preach.
Yeah.
And you saw how, in fact, it works.
And what Bishop Giancarlo said about Steve and Shannon Mersinger, that they were more Brazilian coming into that culture, and that the Brazilians received them and accepted them, and that's good training.
Dick, there's a sense in which you could argue that no real growth takes place if it's not preceded by brokenness. And a lot of time, in fact, Don Larson, the fellow who started the Toronto Institute for Linguistics, used to teach a word that really didn't exist, but it was deparochialization. And he said that was the first process that a potential cross-cultural worker must go through, is this dying to one's cultural self. And we believe our training program allows the context for that to happen.
There's not a lot of time for this, but someone gave us about this long a word about the training program itself, because it's really exciting what's going on. It's going through a geographic transition this summer. Say just a word, Darrell or Frank or whomever, about how we go about doing at least one part of our training.
If you're going to train people for cross-cultural ministry, I think we need to get out of Atlanta, Georgia. Now, you could do it there. So 4 years ago, the Brazil Methodist Church asked us, will you come alongside us and help us trying to figure out how to prepare and train Brazilian missionaries. So for the last 4 years, we've been in Brazil, training our missionaries. In the process, we have trained over 200 Brazilians. And it's been a great experience for the Brazilians and the Americans to interact with each other. It's just been a fabulous experience. Well, out of that, the spin-off of that is today, a young couple, Gustavo and Dalila Falero, are now in Paris working with least reach people groups. Do you know who they are? It's the arts community. So here are Brazilians who settle into our training, were sent by the Brazilian church to Paris to work in a least reach people group, frankly, the arts community there. So it wasn't just training our own people, but it was coming alongside and training others at the same time. And to me, that just is really working well.
Okay.
Now, we love staying in Brazil, we love the food, but it's time for us to move to another part of the world. So starting this summer, we're going to be in Huancayo, Peru, at 11,500 feet.
It's the nosebleed part of the world. At least there's no snakes up there that can't survive that high.
Nothing can live up there.
That's right. Well, your responses have been really good, and they make me want to ask about a dozen more questions, but the countdown clock marches on southward. So we're almost out of time, but I just have to ask one more thing, and that is wanting to bring this all home. How does the local church figure into all of this? What role, if any, do local congregations have in reaching least reached peoples? And is the Mission Society doing anything to help local churches actually embrace such a calling?
Obviously, that would be my question.
It's about time.
It's about time. Everybody that's a member of a local church, say amen. Okay. We have a line in our global outreach teaching that says missions is the mission of the church, and we firmly believe that. And the reason that we do is we really believe the last things Jesus said before he left was the most important things, and that's what he focused on, telling the church to go into all the world. And so we pattern our teaching after that. I love the way that John and Catherine sort of tied all that together. Darrell and I were talking about it a little bit earlier in the afternoon, where they talked about transforming the community, and then they talked about going to the church that they were members of and working with and transforming them, talking about transforming them, because the community won't be transformed unless the church is transformed. The nation won't be transformed unless the church is transformed. The world won't be transformed unless the church is transformed. And so that's what we're all about. We go through a number of ways of doing that. I call it the 3 T's. Here lately, we do some teaching that basically lays out biblical foundation for being involved in mission. We talk about the world, just as Darrell was talking about with our missionaries, but explaining the world to the church, at least what it looks like through God's eyes. And then the last thing we say is, given those 2 things, what does that mean for the local church? What does that mean for us in being on mission with God? And so that's the first T, the teaching. Then we give some tools to churches that, quite frankly, guides them along in the process. They're not prescriptive. We don't prescribe anything, and I don't care how many churches we work with. The end result of every one of those churches will be different, because as they work through their global outreach plan, God is telling them something different than the church down the street or in the next community or in the next state. And so we love to see that. But we do have some tools to guide them in the process. And then the third T is training wheels. We sort of come alongside. You've heard us use that term a lot, and we really believe that that's our role. We don't lead. We come alongside and work and partner with people. And so we're just kind of there to walk along with churches and kind of be a steadying hand every once in a while if they get a little wobbly, which sometimes that occurs, and so forth. And so that's sort of our role in all that. And you heard George last night kind of talk about that process that we went through with them, and you saw the transformation that took place, not only in the church's life, but in George's life as well. And then this morning you heard Max talk about the transformation at the family church. And I have a wonderful job to see those kind of transformations take place. And I was just 18 days ago, we just wrapped up another church up in Chapin, South Carolina, and saw that transformation take place once again. Max was there and did the preaching on Sunday for us and so forth. And we have a little snippet. We did a little bit of videotaping, and I just want you to see the pastor and what his heart was as it relates to how we worked with that church at that particular time. This little video clip happened 30 minutes after the close of their life commitment service. So let's run that if you don't mind.
I would recommend the Mission Society's program for Global Impact to every church. We knew we felt God calling us to do more, to go outside of our community in a greater way, but didn't have a clue about how to do it. And the Mission Society came alongside of us, gave us freedom to be who we are, gave us freedom to seek God and to seek His precise, clear vision for us as an individual church, but gave us the practical steps, the manual, here's a tried and true method that if you'll just work and allow God to work this process, you can trust God in this process. And that's what we did. We had an incredible team of people who did that, and it was so beautiful to see it all come together. Absolutely recommend it to other churches. I am a 100% Mission Society guy, and would love to see everybody get hooked up.
We'd love to see everybody get hooked up. So would we. and if you really want to talk about what breaks my heart, man, we need 10,000 of those churches out there.
Sure.
So many of them just don't seem to get it.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to add to that.
That's probably enough. Thank you.